The year was 1873, and the city of Augsburg, in the Kingdom of Bavaria, stood as a testament to human progress. It was a place where the medieval and the modern coexisted. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages on cobblestone streets mingled with the distant hum of textile mills powered by steam. This was an era of burgeoning scientific discovery, a time when men believed that reason and observation could eventually categorize, explain, and master every facet of the natural world. It was against this backdrop of enlightened certainty that the story of Emma Richter began, a story that would challenge the very foundations of that certainty. The Richters were a family of quiet respectability. Friedrich Richter was a master clockmaker, a man whose life was dedicated to precision, order, and the intricate, predictable mechanics of time. His wife, Lena, was a seamstress, known for her gentle demeanor and steadfast devotion to her family. They lived in a modest but well-kept apartment on the outskirts of the city, a home filled with the comforting sounds of ticking clocks and the scent of fresh bread. Their lives were a model of Bavarian industriousness and stability. Their only child, Emma, was born in the spring of 1862. For the first 11 years of her life, she was an unremarkable, healthy girl. She attended school, helped her mother with chores, and showed a particular aptitude for music, often humming tunes she had heard only once. The first sign that something was amiss occurred on the morning of her 11th birthday, April 17, 1873. Lena Richter entered her daughter's room to wake her and found the girl sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to transcend a mere nightmare. "Mutter," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse. "The fire! The man in the blue coat will not escape." Lena, assuming it was the remnant of a bad dream, comforted her daughter and thought little of it. Later that afternoon, however, news spread through the neighborhood of a devastating fire at a tailor's workshop across the city. A man had perished, trapped in his upstairs workroom. Witnesses described him as a well-known tailor who always wore a distinctive blue work coat. He had indeed not escaped. The coincidence was chilling, but the Richters dismissed it as just that, a morbid coincidence. But it was not a singular event. The episodes began to multiply. Emma would experience sudden, debilitating headaches, after which she would speak with unsettling clarity about events happening elsewhere in the city. She described a lost child found weeping by the fountain in the Maximilianstrasse, minutes before the news reached their street. She spoke of a cart accident involving a milkman named Herr Schmidt, detailing the exact intersection, moments before the sound of splintering wood and clattering cans echoed from that very direction. These were not vague premonitions. They were specific, factual, and verifiable reports that she could not possibly have known through any ordinary means. She was a child who rarely ventured beyond her own street, yet she seemed to possess a window to the entire city. The episodes left her pale and exhausted, as if the act of perceiving drained her of vital energy. Friedrich Richter was a man of gears and pendulums, of cause and effect. His daughter's new faculty defied every logical principle he held dear. His initial concern swiftly curdled into a deep, fearful anxiety. He forbade Emma from speaking of her fits, as he called them, and became increasingly stern and withdrawn. Lena, by contrast, was awestruck and terrified in equal measure. She began to see her daughter not as ill, but as touched by something divine, or perhaps demonic. The atmosphere in the Richter home, once so orderly, became thick with unspoken dread. Inevitably, the secret could not be contained. Whispers began to circulate among the neighbors. The baker's wife heard of the prediction of the fire.
The cobbler's son spoke of the lost child. Emma Richter, the clockmaker's quiet daughter, was suddenly the subject of intense and nervous speculation. Was she a witch, a prophet, or was she simply insane? The local priest, Father Weber, was summoned. After speaking with a terrified Emma and her distraught parents, he concluded that this was not a matter of scripture, but for science. The 19th century's faith in medicine was its new religion. He advised the Richters to seek the counsel of Dr. Heinrich Wolff, the city's most respected physician and a man known for his modern neurological approaches to disorders of the mind. Reluctantly, fearfully, Friedrich Richter agreed. He could not fix his daughter with his tools, so he would place his faith in the tools of science. He had no idea that he was about to propel his daughter from a local curiosity into a national sensation. The mystery of Emma Richter begins not with a miracle, but with a malfunction in the predictable machinery of a life. But what was the source of her terrifying knowledge? The investigation is about to begin, and it will pit the era's greatest minds against a puzzle they cannot solve. To follow the journey of the girl who knew too much, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of the revelation.
Dr. Heinrich Wolff was the embodiment of Augsburg's scientific pride. A man in his late 50s with a meticulously trimmed beard and an air of unshakable authority. His consulting rooms were a temple to the new medicine. They were filled with polished brass microscopes, electrical stimulation machines, and charts of the human cranium. He was a disciple of the emerging field of neurology, believing that all human behavior, no matter how strange, could be traced to a physical source within the brain. When Friedrich Richter, his face etched with shame and fear, explained his daughter's condition, Dr. Wolff listened with intense clinical interest. He saw not a miracle, but a fascinating medical anomaly, a diagnosis waiting to be made. Emma was brought to his office the following day. She was a slight, pale girl who seemed to shrink into her Sunday dress, her eyes downcast. Dr. Wolff's examination was thorough and dispassionate. He tested her reflexes, her eyesight, her hearing. He examined her scalp for any signs of injury. He used an ophthalmoscope to peer into the back of her eyes, searching for signs of intracranial pressure. He found nothing. She was, from a purely physical standpoint, a perfectly healthy 11-year-old girl. Frustrated but undeterred, Dr. Wolff decided to document the phenomena himself. He instructed the Richters to keep a detailed journal of Emma's utterances during her headaches. He began visiting their home at different hours, a notebook in hand, hoping to witness an episode firsthand. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Emma was quiet and withdrawn, and Dr. Wolff began to suspect a case of adolescent hysteria, perhaps subconsciously encouraged by her superstitious mother. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, it happened. Emma was sitting in the parlor, attempting to sew, when she suddenly winced and dropped her needle. She pressed her hands to her temples, her face contorted in pain. Dr. Wolff leaned forward, his pen poised. "The bridge," Emma murmured, her voice a monotone. "The old stone bridge, the third arch. A woman, her basket is too heavy. The apples, they will spill. She will fall. Her ankle, it will twist." Dr. Wolff noted the time. He dispatched his assistant, a young medical student, to the old stone bridge with instructions to observe and report. The student returned an hour later, his face pale with disbelief. Exactly as described, a woman carrying an overfilled basket of apples had stumbled on the uneven cobbles near the third arch. The apples had scattered everywhere, and the woman had indeed fallen, twisting her ankle badly. The event had occurred within minutes of Emma's pronouncement. This was no longer anecdotal. For Dr. Wolff, this was a documented, witness event. His scientific curiosity was now alight with a mixture of excitement and profound unease. He had eliminated fraud. The girl had no accomplices. He had found no evidence of epilepsy or any known neurological disorder that could explain such specific, veridical cognition. He was a man of reason, and reason was failing him. He intensified his studies. He had Emma admitted to a private clinic for observation. He monitored her diet, her sleep patterns, her vital signs. He found that her episodes were often preceded by a slight drop in body temperature and a minute change in her pulse rate. But the content of the visions remained stubbornly beyond his reach. They were like random pages torn from a citywide ledger of imminent minor tragedies. She predicted a broken window pane in a schoolhouse, a quarrel between two businessmen that would cancel a contract, a prize pig escaping its pen in a village 2 miles away. The predictions were trivial, yet their accuracy was flawless. Dr. Wolf, facing a professional crisis, did what any devoted scientist would do. He published his findings. He wrote a meticulous paper titled A Case of Spontaneous Veridical Cognition in a Juvenile Subject, and sent it to a prominent medical journal in Berlin. He presented the cold, hard facts, avoiding any metaphysical speculation. His conclusion was stark. The phenomena observed defy current neurological understanding. No organic or psychosomatic etiology can be established.
The publication of Dr. Wolf's paper was like throwing a lit match into a powder keg. The scientific community was thrown into an uproar. The story was picked up by newspapers across Germany and beyond. Emma Richter was no longer a local secret. She was the Augsburg Oracle, the girl who saw tomorrow. The modest Richter apartment was soon besieged by a carnival of curiosity seekers, journalists, spiritualists, and skeptics. Friedrich Richter, horrified by the notoriety, barred the door and pulled his daughter from school. His orderly world had been utterly destroyed by his daughter's inexplicable gift. The scientific establishment, however, was not ready to concede. If a respected man like Wolf could not find an answer, they would send their best. Challenges were issued. A delegation from the University of Munich, comprised of a neurologist, a psychologist, and a physicist, arrived in Augsburg with a singular mission: to expose the fraud and debunk the growing myth of the psychic girl. They represented the full might of institutional science, and they were utterly confident that they would find the trek behind the mystery. Dr. Wolf's clinical approach had failed to find an answer, but it had unleashed a storm of attention. Now, the most brilliant minds in Germany were descending on Augsburg to solve the puzzle. Could they find where Dr. Wolf had failed? The scrutiny is about to reach its peak. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter in The Scientific Siege. The arrival of the Munich delegation marked a new and more intense phase of Emma Richter's ordeal. Led by the formidable Professor Albrecht Fischer, a neurologist known for his razor-sharp intellect and deep skepticism of all things occult, the team was determined to approach the case with ruthless objectivity. They saw themselves as defenders of rationalism, there to clean up the mess left by Wolf's misguided open-mindedness. They took over a larger, more sterile room at the clinic. Emma was subjected to a battery of tests far more rigorous than anything Dr. Wolf had conceived. The psychologist, Dr. Strauss, interviewed her for hours, searching for signs of a fantasy-prone personality or evidence that she was unconsciously cueing off subtle environmental signals. The physicist, Professor Reinhardt, swept the Richter apartment and the clinic room for hidden sources of sound or vibration, theorizing that she might be receiving coded messages. They found nothing. Professor Fischer's methods were the most intense. He used the latest technology. He applied mild electrical currents to Emma's scalp to map brain function. He administered sedatives and stimulants to see how they affected her faculty. He even had her hypnotized, hoping to access a subconscious well of knowledge. Through it all, Emma remained passive and increasingly withdrawn. The episodes continued, but now they happened under the cold, observing eyes of men who saw her not as a child, but as a fascinating specimen. It was during one of these observed episodes that the Munich team had their first taste of the inexplicable. Emma, under hypnosis and connected to a primitive galvanometer that measured electrical skin response, suddenly spoke. Her voice, flat and distant, described a problem with the delegation's own equipment. The battery cell, the one from the black box with the copper wire, it is weak. The connection is faulty. The needle will not move correctly. Professor Reinhardt scoffed but checked the equipment anyway. To his astonishment, he found that one of the central battery cells in their custom-built monitoring device was indeed nearly depleted, and a wire had come slightly loose from its terminal, a flaw that would have produced inaccurate readings. It was a minute internal mechanical fault that none of them could have noticed without dismantling the unit. Yet the girl in a tranced state had diagnosed it instantly. The event shook the team's confidence. Coincidence could not explain this. Fraud was impossible. She had no access to their machinery. Professor Fischer, though visibly unsettled, doubled down. He designed a controlled experiment. He isolated Emma in a soundproofed room. Through a speaking tube, he would ask her to describe what was happening in another room in the clinic, where various actions would be performed by his assistants. A nurse would drop a book. A doctor would break a thermometer. A specific page would be torn from a calendar. The results were a catastrophe for the skeptics. Emma's success rate was 100%. She didn't just get the general action right. She described the color of the book's cover, the number of the torn calendar page, the pattern of the glass shards from the thermometer. It was as if she were standing in the room, a silent, invisible witness. The Munich delegation left Augsburg a week later, their confidence shattered. They did not hold a press conference. They did not publish a triumphant paper. They simply left, their notes a confused jumble of observations that led to no logical conclusion. Professor Fischer's final words to Dr. Wolf were muttered in frustration. There is no mechanism. There is only the fact. The failure of the Munich team was a turning point. It transformed Emma Richter from a medical curiosity into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. If Germany's finest scientific minds could not explain her, then perhaps she was something beyond science. The spiritualist movement, which was enjoying a surge in popularity on both sides of the Atlantic, seized upon her as their ultimate champion. Here was proof of clairvoyance, of a spirit world that could interact with our own. Emma was no longer a girl, she was a symbol. For Emma herself, the constant scrutiny and testing had taken a terrible toll. She became increasingly frail and listless. The headaches grew more severe, the episodes more draining. She began to fear her own ability, seeing it not as a gift but as a curse that had stolen her childhood and isolated her from the world. The weight of knowing, of constantly seeing the small impending misfortunes of strangers, became an unbearable burden. The girl who saw tomorrow was now a prisoner of the present, trapped in a nightmare of perpetual anticipation. Science had surrendered, but the world's fascination had only just begun. Emma Richter was now a public figure, a vessel for the hopes and fears of a nation. What happens when a child becomes a symbol? Her story is about to escape the laboratory and take on a life of its own. To follow Emma's journey into the heart of a cultural storm, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. The vacuum left by the retreat of orthodox science was quickly filled by a tide of public fervor. Emma Richter, the Augsburg Oracle, was now a figure of international renown. Newspapers across Europe and America carried stories about her, often embellished with dramatic flair. She was hailed as a living miracle by the religious, a powerful psychic by the spiritualists,
and a fascinating enigma by the public at large. The Richter household, once a bastion of quiet order, became a fortress under siege. Friedrich Richter, a broken and humiliated man, could no longer practice his craft due to the constant crowds outside his door. Journalists offered money for interviews. Photographers tried to sneak pictures of the pale, haunted-looking girl. Promoters from as far away as London and Paris arrived with ludicrous contracts, wanting to put Emma on stage in music halls to have her perform her feats for a paying audience. Friedrich, to his credit, threw them all out, his disgust for the spectacle warring with his fear for his daughter. It was Lena Richter who proved more susceptible to the outside influence. Where her husband saw a curse, she began to see a divine purpose. She was approached by a charismatic spiritualist leader from Vienna, a man named Herr Dr. Franz Engel, who spoke of Emma's gift not as an illness, but as a sacred connection to the astral plane. He convinced Lena that Emma's suffering was a necessary sacrifice for the enlightenment of humanity. Slowly, insidiously, he inserted himself into the family's life, becoming Lenin's confidant and spiritual advisor.
Under Engel's guidance, the nature of the experiments changed. Gone were the clinical tests of Wolff and Fischer. Instead, Engel began holding private séances in the Richter parlor, inviting wealthy patrons and influential believers to witness Emma's abilities. The room would be darkened. Engel would ask leading questions about deceased relatives or business investments. Emma, exhausted and confused, would often remain silent or mutter incoherently. But on occasion, she would provide a stunningly accurate detail, the name of a lost pet, the location of a missing will, that would send the attendees into raptures and fill Engel's coffers with donations. Dr. Wolff, watching from the sidelines, was appalled. He saw Engel for the charlatan he was, and saw Emma's health declining rapidly under the strain of these grotesque performances. He tried to intervene, to convince Friedrich to put a stop to it, but the clockmaker was too defeated to oppose his wife and the persuasive Engel. Emma was caught between the cold, dehumanizing scrutiny of science and the exploitative theater of spiritualism. Neither saw her. They only saw her ability. The content of Emma's visions also began to shift. No longer confined to the trivial, immediate future of Augsburg, she began speaking of larger, more ominous things. She muttered about iron horses vomiting smoke and great birds that carry men in their bellies. Uncanny descriptions of trains and airships that a girl from her background could not have conceived. She spoke of a great noise that would shake the world and rivers of blood flowing between nations. These dystopian glimpses were vague and poetic, but they were reported breathlessly by the press, adding a layer of apocalyptic dread to her legend. She was no longer just predicting spilled apples. She was seemingly prophesying the future of mankind. The psychological toll on Emma was catastrophic. She stopped speaking except during her episodes. She developed a profound fear of other people, knowing she might inadvertently see a coming accident or illness befall them. She refused to leave the apartment, retreating into a world of silence and shadow. Her gift had become a monstrous parasite, consuming the host. She was the most famous girl in Europe, and she was utterly, completely alone. The climax of this period of exploitation came when Engel, seeking an even bigger stage, arranged a demonstration for a visiting Bavarian nobleman known for his interest in the occult. The séance was a disaster. Pressured by Engel to perform, Emma suffered a particularly violent episode. Instead of speaking a prediction, she began to scream, a long, piercing wail of pure terror. She described not a future event, but a present one. The nobleman's young son, who had been left back at the family estate, had just fallen from his horse and was lying unconscious in a field.
The message was relayed by telegraph. It was true. The boy survived, but the event stripped away the last veneer of theatricality. This was not a parlor trick. It was raw, terrifying, and real. The nobleman, shaken to his core, used his influence to have Engel run out of Augsburg. The spiritualist circus collapsed as quickly as it had arrived. But the damage was done. Emma was left physically depleted and psychologically shattered. Her family was destitute and ostracized. The world had taken its pound of flesh from the girl who could see tomorrow, and now it seemed there was nothing left to take. The spectacle is over, but the mystery remains. Emma Richter is broken and her ability is fading. But is that the end of the story? The final chapter of her life holds one last profound secret. To understand the ultimate fate of the girl science couldn't explain, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the concluding installment.
With the departure of the detestable Engel, a tense quiet fell over the Richter household. The crowds, finding no more spectacle, gradually dispersed. The newspapers, having milked the story dry, moved on to other curiosities. Emma Richter was forgotten as quickly as she had been famous. For Friedrich and Lena Richter, this obscurity was a blessing. They could finally try to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, though the scars ran deep. Friedrich found work repairing clocks in the back of a jeweler's shop, away from public view. Lena, racked with guilt over her role in enabling Engel, devoted herself to caring for her daughter. Emma, however, was a ghost of her former self. The constant bombardment of perceptions and the trauma of exploitation had exacted a terrible price. The episodes of radical cognition, the precise factual visions, ceased altogether. The violent headaches, however, did not. They were replaced by a different kind of experience. Emma would fall into trance-like states where she would speak in flowing, poetic, and deeply symbolic language. She spoke of seeing the world as a great tapestry, of threads of light connecting all things, and of a silent hum that underpinned all of creation. It was no longer about specific events. It was a perception of the underlying connectedness of reality itself. Dr. Heinrich Wolff, though his reputation had suffered for his involvement in the case, never abandoned Emma. He continued to visit, not as an investigator, but as a doctor concerned for his patient. He was fascinated by this evolution in her condition. He meticulously documented her new abstract utterances, though they defied any attempt at verification. He theorized that the initial precise faculty had been a symptom of a neurological storm, a hyperactive state of a specific brain region that allowed for the perception of information through an unknown quantum or electromagnetic mechanism. The burnout of this faculty, he proposed, had led to this more diffuse, holistic perception. It was a theory born of desperation, a scientific handwave at something far beyond his understanding. Emma's physical health continued to decline. She was diagnosed with a severe form of anemia and a general wasting away that no tonic or diet could reverse. It was as if the same energy that had once powered her visions was now consuming her from within. In her final weeks, she was almost entirely bedridden, a wisp of a girl lost in the sheets. She spoke very little, but her presence was strangely peaceful. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, unsettling calm. She died quietly on a spring morning in 1877, 4 years after her abilities first manifested. She was just 15 years old. Her death was noted with a brief sentimental obituary in the Augsburg paper, referring to her as the tragic oracle and a victim of her own strange gift. A private autopsy was performed at the behest of Dr. Wolff, desperate for one last chance to find a physical answer. He examined her brain with meticulous care, searching for a lesion, a tumor, a unique formation, anything that could explain the phenomena he had witnessed. He found nothing. The brain of Emma Richter was perfectly normal, utterly unremarkable. It was the final, maddening contradiction. The container was ordinary, yet its contents had been extraordinary. In the decades that followed, the case of Emma Richter faded into obscurity, becoming a footnote in the history of parapsychology and a quaint local legend in Augsburg. Dr. Wolff's extensive notes were filed away and forgotten. The Richter parents, heartbroken, lived out the rest of their days in quiet anonymity. The story might have ended there, were it not for a discovery made in the 1990s. A researcher digging through archived medical records in Munich found Wolf's complete files, including the transcripts of Emma's later poetic utterances. To a modern reader, trained in the language of physics, her descriptions were electrifying. Her talk of a tapestry and connecting threads bore a stunning resemblance to the modern scientific concepts of quantum entanglement and the space-time continuum. Her silent hum was a perfect metaphor for the zero-point field or the cosmological constant. A new theory emerged that Wolf could never had conceived. Perhaps Emma Richter's brain was not a receiver of information, but a filter. Perhaps all humans are subconsciously connected to a fundamental field of information, a vast, implicit record of the past, present, and future. Our brains, for the sake of evolutionary survival, filter out this constant noise to focus on the immediate present. Emma's, then, was a breakdown of this filter. Initially, it allowed random specific bits of data to leak through, the apple basket, the broken thermometer. Later, as her neurological condition changed, it allowed a more direct, unfiltered perception of the field itself, which she could only describe in the only language she had, poetry and metaphor.
This theory is, of course, unprovable, but it transforms Emma Richter from a mere medical mystery into something far more profound. She was not a witch or a prophet. She was perhaps an accidental pioneer, a human glimpse into a deeper layer of reality that science is only now beginning to map mathematically. Her tragedy was that she was born a century too soon, a canary in the coal mine of human consciousness whose song nobody knew how to decipher. This story of Emma Richter is a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to reshape our questions. Her brief, brilliant life challenges the boundaries of what we know about the mind and reality itself. If you are drawn to the unexplained, to the stories that linger at the edge of science, then your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the deepest mysteries of the human experience. The case of Emma Richter endures not because it provides answers, but because it sits perfectly at the intersection of known and unknown, a permanent thorn in the side of scientific complacency. It is a story that forces us to confront the limitations of our paradigms and the enduring human desire to categorize the uncategorizable. Her brief life serves as a profound case study in the sociology of knowledge, the ethics of investigation, and the timeless question of what it means to be human in a universe far stranger than we often care to admit. From a historical perspective, Emma's story is a perfect artifact of the late 19th century. It captures the tension between the age of mechanical certainty and the dawning age of psychological and spiritual inquiry. Her responses to her Dr. Wolf's clinical confusion, Professor Fisher's skeptical fury, and Herr Engel's exploitative mysticism represent the three primary ways her society had to process the anomalous: pathologize it, deny it, or spiritualize it. There was no framework that could simply accept it as a neutral, if bewildering fact of nature. She was a Rorschach test for the anxieties of her era. The ethical implications of her treatment remain deeply troubling. Emma was never consulted. She was a subject to be examined, a phenomenon to be tested, a symbol to be used. Her well-being was consistently secondary to the agenda of the adults around her, whether their agenda was scientific glory, spiritual dogma, or public fame. Her story stands as an early and stark warning about the human cost of treating consciousness as a mere puzzle to be solved, rather than a lived experience to be understood with compassion. The modern theoretical lens, particularly the filter theory of consciousness, offers the most satisfying, if speculative, explanation. It reframes her ability not as an addition of something extra, but as a subtraction of a normal cognitive barrier. This aligns with reports from mystics and meditators across cultures who describe states of unity and omnipresent awareness achieved through the quieting of the normal thinking mind. Emma's neurological condition might have inadvertently produced a similar state, a permanent and debilitating peak experience that her young mind lacked the maturity to process or articulate. Her visions were not glimpses of the future in a linear sense, but perceptions of information from a domain where time, as we understand it, is not a fundamental constraint. Ultimately, the mystery of Emma Richter is a mirror. For skeptics, she is a cautionary tale about the power of coincidence and the human tendency to find pattern in noise. For believers in the paranormal, she is proof positive of psychic abilities. For the open-minded scientist, she is an invitation to humility, a reminder that our current models of the brain and consciousness are provisional.